All right. Welcome, everyone, to Grail Country, part two of On Fairy Stories with Eugene Terekhin. And Nate Hile has joined us. Thank goodness. They are the masters. I am the student. So, where are we going to start? You wanted to start with a thought, Nate. So, we were talking
Oh
previously.
no, no. What I
Eugene
was saying,
shared
I didn't
something.
want to start with the thought. I was just saying that the mode of in our pre-conversation, the mode of thought that Eugene was in when he was talking about
Oh, yeah.
like this kind of longing that is like both sorrowful and joyful, this deep,
Right.
deep longing. And I was what I was saying is like, okay, let's hold that thought and have that thought in your mind as we go and enter into this discussion, because really that is at the core of what fairy is and what it's about.
Right.
Mhm.
Well, could I say this? I don't know if it's too explicit, but I'm going to just throw it out here. You guys were talking before we started, Nate and Eugene were talking about a child knowing who it is in the face of the mother. Eugene
Mm-hmm.
was talking about a movie that he saw that reflected the same idea. And I think what Tolkien is helping us to see in this essay is the face of the mother.
Mhm.
And that is where we get to know ourselves. And, at the risk of sounding new age or pagan, the mother is the earth,
Right.
is the stuff of me, right?
Mhm.
That's who the Theotokos is. Um, and yeah, I read it in the last in the last one that Eugene and I did, but I'll just read it again as a maybe a jumping off point. There's a little poem that was in Fantastes at the beginning of a chapter, and it goes like this: Man doth usurp all space, stares thee in rock, bush, river in the face. Never thine eyes behold a tree. 'Tis no sea thou seest in the sea. 'Tis but a disguised humanity. To avoid thy fellow, vain thy plan. All that interests a man is man. Do we want to start with the reading?
Yeah, let's go ahead and just let's go dive right in.
Okay. Do you want me to read, Nate?
I can read if you want to break.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. And then if I'll go ahead and pause so that there's something that people want to comment on,
Yeah.
we can comment on it. Okay. But even if we apply only these vague and ill-defined limits, it becomes plain that many, even the learned in such matters, have used the term fairy tale very carelessly. A glance at those books of recent times that claim to be collections of fairy stories is enough to show the tales about fairies, about the fair family in any of its houses, or even about dwarves and goblins are only a small part of their content. That is, as we have seen, was to be expected. But these also contain many tales that do not even touch upon fairy at all, that in fact have no business to be included. And just as a reminder there, in case you're coming into this from episode one, he's talking here about fairy as realm, as otherworld, and distinguishing it from fairies or a fairy. And he says that this is the original and more important sense of fairy. So, all right, continuing then. I will give one or two examples of the expurgations I would perform. This will assist the negative side of definition. It will also be found to lead on to the second question: what are the origins of fairy stories? The number of collections of fairy stories is now very great. In English, none probably rival either the popularity or the inclusiveness or the general merit of the 12 books of 12 colors which we owe to Andrew Lang and to his wife. The first of these appeared more than 70 years ago, 1889, and is still in print. Most of its contents pass the test more or less clearly. I will not analyze them, though an analysis might be interesting. But I note in passing that the stories of this blue fairy book, of the stories in this blue fairy book, none are primarily about fairies. Few refer to them. Most of the tales are taken from French sources, as just in some as just choice in some ways at this time is as perhaps would be still, but not to my taste now or in childhood. At any rate, so powerful has been the influence of Charles Perrault since his Conte de ma Mère Loy was first English in the 18th century, and of such other excerpts from the vast storehouse of the Cabinet des Fées as have become well known, that still, I suppose, if you asked a man to name at random a typical fairy story, he would be most likely to name one of these French things, such as Puss in Boots, Cinderella, or Little Red Riding Hood. With some people, Grimm's fairy tales might come first to mind. But what is to be said of the appearance in the Blue Fairy Book of A Voyage to Lilliput? I will say this: it is not a fairy story, neither as its author made it, nor as it appears here condensed by Miss May Kendall. It has no business in this place. I fear that it was included merely because the Lilliputians are small, even diminutive, in a way in which the only way in which they are at all remarkable, but smallness as it is in fairy, as in our world, only an accident. Pygmies are no nearer to fairies than are Patagonians. I do not rule this story out because of its satirical intent. There is satire, sustained or intermittent, in undoubted fairy stories, and the satire may often be intended in traditional tales where we do not now perceive it. I rule it out because the vehicle of the satire, brilliant invention though it may be, belongs to the class of travelers' tales. Such tales report many marvels, but they are marvels to be seen in this mortal world, in some region of our own time and space. Distance alone conceals them. The tales of Gulliver have no more right of entry than the yarns of Baron Munchausen, or than, say, the First Men of the Moon or the Time Machine. Indeed, for the Eloi and the Morlocks would have a better claim than for the Lilliputians. Lilliputians are merely men peered down at, sardonically, from just above the housetops. Eloi and Morlocks live far away in an abyss of time so deep as to work an enchantment upon them. And as if they are descended from ourselves. It may be remembered that an ancient English thinker once derived that elf, the very elves, through Cain from Adam. This enchantment of distance, especially of distant time, is weakened only by the preposterous and incredible time machine itself. But we see in this example one of the main reasons why the borders of fairy story are inevitably dubious. The magic of fairy is not an end in itself. Its virtue is in its operations. Among these are the satisfaction of certain primordial human desires. One of these desires is to survey the depths of space and time. Another, as will be seen, is to hold communion with other living things. A story may thus deal with the satisfaction of these desires, with or without the operation of either machine or magic, and in proportion as it succeeds, it will approach the quality and have the flavor of fairy story. I'm going to pause there because I think that for sure is definitely worth illumination.
I want to just, before we dive into it, because I think this is part of what you just read.
Yeah.
A quote from Chesterton that a friend of mine just sent me this morning. Christianity requires us to be more and not less pagan. With respect to the positive, life-affirming aspects of paganism. In the same way, Christianity requires us to be more and not less attentive to our bodily senses, in order both to fulfill their infinite capacity and yet to rise beyond even their astonishing compass.
That's hilarious, Shari, that you're sharing with it right now. I just made a comment. I didn't have a chance to finish Paul's video from this morning yet, but I made a comment on it. And the comment that I made was, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll just summarize the basic gist of it. The comment is that what we see going on the political fringes on the left and right is an assertion of paganism. Now, I do not mean that in a completely dismissive and only negative way, right?
Yeah.
The reason that we have these fringe reassertions of the pagans is because the Christian culture is failing in integrating them properly because it is lost connection to the logos. I mean, because so think of it in terms of Pan in the Chronicles of Narnia, right? So when you have a Christian culture where the logos is properly centered, then the pagan can enter and be integrated and be a functional and healthy part of the entire picture.
Mm.
But when we become decentered from the logos, and we see that the fringes rise and the old gods reassert their own power out of connection with the logos, and wildness ensues. And that's what's going on at both of the extremes. It's not just on the left, it's not just on the right, it's on both extremes go in the same direction. So for example, the example I gave is so the Nazis were nominally Christian, but Jung was correct in saying that they were possessed by Wotan. They were not so even though they were nominally Christian, they fell under the influence of their old gods, because they became decentered from the logos. And that does not involve being properly centered on the logos. Does not mean driving the pagan out entirely. That's actually one of the missteps that you can make, is to think that the pagan has to be destroyed. No, the pagan has to be properly integrated.
Yeah. Okay. So I would say, oh, now I lost my train of thought.
I didn't intend to go there, but then you shared that Chesterton quote, and it's yeah, that's exactly what I was just talking about this morning.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
this is very interesting, and I see that not only in America, this dualism and this tension. I also see it in the world as well, because even looking at the Russian Orthodoxy, beautiful as it is, and vast as it is, and ancient as it is, I believe in certain ways it has lost its connection to the Logos. And that's why it's in my opinion, being possessed by the spirit of Mars
Right.
nowadays.
Yeah. Or
It's the
Perun,
spirit of
maybe might be
Mars
more.
and the Old
Yeah.
Testament deities, Yeah.
Yeah, even though they're marching under the banner of the Theotokos, that's
Yeah.
not who's controlling them. That's right.
Yeah.
Calling yourself a Christian and being a nominal Christian has nothing to do with it. You can still be under the control of one of these principalities and powers, regardless of what your nominal identity.
I know what I was going to say. Can I say it really quick before I forget?
Yeah, go for it.
So I think what you're describing is idolatry.
Yeah.
So, oh, now I lost it again. Damn it. I was thinking about St. Paul on Mars Hill when he said, "Hey guys, you're worshiping these gods. I got a name for you." Right? So he didn't say they're not the right gods.
Right.
That's not what he said. He didn't exclude the gods. Mm-hmm. He said that this is their name. They seem like many, but they are this one. And I just wanted to show you something. I want to show you guys something here that I discovered recently. I'm going to share the screen.
Can I just say something while you're looking for it? Because I think that's right, Shari. Because you think of what the gods represent in the gods have both a macrocosmic function as principalities and powers that assert influence over us and are hyper agencies, but they also have a microcosmic influence, and they are also us when we are fragmented and not ourselves properly centered on the logos.
Right. So this is a famous cross in Cumbria. It's called the Gosforth Cross, and I'm not going to get into too much detail, but it's covered in images like here and here. This is Odin, I believe. Anyway, it's covered in images of the different Viking gods, and
Right, the gods aren't gone, but they're brought into proper relation with the logos.
well, they actually gain meaning.
Right.
They gain meaning. Think
This
about
is what C.S. Lewis shows this is what C.S. Lewis shows in the space trilogy, right? When he talks about like true Mars and true Venus. It's like
Yeah.
when the gods are restored by being in proper relation to the logos, then they don't their meaning is not reduced or diminished, it's increased.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. And I think that's what Christ does. He fills the things full. He fills them full. He fulfills them, right?
Fills, yes.
Yeah. So I just think that's really interesting. Okay, so some of the gods depicted are Odin, Loki, Heimdall, Heimdallr. I don't know how to say that. And I think the flat one-dimensional way of looking at that is like, oh, okay, so Christianity's at the top, so that means they're at the bottom, which means, no, they're included in the story.
Yeah, you wouldn't include. Yeah, if the idea was simply, hey, Christianity has completely totally abolished these things and replaced them, then you wouldn't integrate them at all.
Well, the thing is that the gods are real. People are encountering them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're not real. Like, and of course we can all talk about what real means, but
oh yeah.
But to me, if we talked about this years ago, Nate, when I used the example of, some Nordic man stepping out on a beautiful morning and feeling just a whoosh of gratitude, picking up a stick and finding the face, carving one, okay, on the stick. He needs a face to thank, right? He thanks the face, but the face is not on the stick. It's only something that he's able to have that kind of reciprocity with. It's all the things, right? It's only when he stops short at the stick, which is what happens to us. And I think what is exactly what's happened to Christianity. Think about the stick as a man with being crucified, right? A cross.
Mm-hmm.
And now, we've stopped short there, and everything behind him, all of creation, and this is I'm just being super harsh critical here, and if you want to push back on me, that's great. But everything behind him is it just becomes matter. It becomes materialistic. It gets reduced to whatever, cause and effect. So anyway, I just
No, I see what you're saying. You're talking about what happens with like the kind of like when Christianity becomes too iconoclastic, right? Where it wants when it wants to strip all the images and leave us with like bare plain chapels that like have that contain no beauty.
But it could happen the other way too. It could be, like there are definite problems in Catholicism and Orthodoxy with idolatry.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Right? Yes, that's precisely right. That's precisely right. And it's like I wasn't hearing that in what you said, but that's where I wanted to go. Yeah. Is that it's actually this delicate balancing act between and what's interesting is like I really think there's a way in which this is connected to heaven and earth and the masculine and the feminine. And it's like when when it's like when we focused on too much in heaven, in the intellectual path, in the masculine and the philosophical, then we end up becoming too iconoclastic, and we strip all the beauty out of the world, and we lose touch with the real. And when we go too much in the other direction, we become completely given over to our passions.
Yeah.
And too connected to the earth. And it's like we don't want to be in either place. Right?
No, and
that's actually what I'm talking about when I'm talking about like properly integrating the pagan, which is associated with the earth, right? So it's like we're material creatures. We're not supposed to hate the earth and to hate embodiment and to hate our passions. We're supposed to learn how to gain proper mastery over them so that they don't control us.
But it's interesting that you, Shari, mentioned, everything being turned into like matter. Matter isn't material. But, I looked up the etymology of the word matter, and it's mother.
Mother,
I know.
So believe it or not, for the ancients, when they used the word, they didn't think like a bunch of elements, a bunch of like, chemicals together that, like the building blocks.
It's actually
they thought of mother.
It's actually the primordial matter that the gods themselves are created from to the pagan mind. That's what, it's a lot. It's very much alive. It's full of life. It's not our matter is dead, but the matter of the pagan mind gives birth to the gods. It's very much alive.
Well, here's the thing. For the ancient mind, matter was not inanimate. Okay. And that's why the gods are real. Because Martin Shaw made this point, and I thought it was really good. The Thor was not the god Thor. Thor was thunder. There was no separation between them.
Yeah.
Okay. So they didn't create gods. They didn't go out one day and say, let's make a hierarchy of gods. No, the gods spoke to them. And
go back to your face thing.
I know I'm being really controversial.
Go back to your face thing. Thor is the face of thunder. The experience of thunder is real, and Thor is the face that humans put on thunder because you know what? We are supposed to personify everything. It's actually what our job is.
Well, that's why I read that poem by Henry Sutton. All that man sees is man. Okay. So he's looking for that reciprocity, that relationship. In that's the thing you read from.
But how do you convince people who haven't? How do you convince people?
Let me just say.
Go ahead.
Finish. That's what you read from Esther Meek. They're looking for the smile of the mother.
Yes, I agree entirely. But how do we convince people how do we convince people that this is moving in the right direction who are absolutely terrified that what you're talking about is nothing short of idolatry?
Well, I don't propose to convince anyone, but I would like to help them see it. I would like to help them see the smile of the mother, because what it does is it invokes gratitude. And when you are in a position of gratitude, you are in a position of humility. And if we don't get some humility happening around here, and I mean in the world in general, we're in deep trouble. Right.
Yeah, it changes everything because it changes your entire orientation to. Actually, it's actually what makes the real. Like if there's no relation, like if you're viewing something as an object and merely object, you have no relationship to it.
Yeah.
Other than you have no relationship to it. It is just you only see it in terms of what its use is for you, right? Everything becomes cast in terms of utility and downstream from that, ultimately power. And power is ultimately my ability to fulfill my desires without concern for anything else.
Right.
Like that's how power manifests in the world, is like the more power I have, the more I can fulfill my desires, and other people's desires don't matter as long as as long as I'm able to fulfill my desires. And if you are seeing the face of the mother in the world, and you are operating from a place of gratitude, you can't look at the world that you actually cannot.
No.
It would be impossible for you to look at the world that way anymore, because that's not, that it's real.
That's right.
That it's not just there for you to do what you want with it. So
Yes, I'm just. Well, do you have some thoughts, Eugene? We're just totally.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I was, yeah, I'm following. I have a lot of thoughts, but I don't want to interrupt. Anyway, but speaking of interesting, that the whole idea of a fairy stories, and Tolkien kind of insists that fairy a, is like a realm, or actually even like going back to the mother's face. It's actually the mother's face,
Yeah.
because that's where enchantment happens.
Yeah.
It's when
Yeah.
the child looks at the mother, in the mother's, catches this gaze. That's where the magic happens. And I happened to look up the etymology of fairy or fae. I don't know how you pronounce it.
Say.
Fae.
yeah,
Fae, fae.
Say.
All right. Okay. So it's French. It's French, and that's where fairy comes from. Fair. And then also the possible origin is the Old French faire, which means to enchant. So a fairy and as a realm is basically like if you enter there,
Yeah.
you're gonna see fairies, because fairies embody that enchantment. They come to you, and in our world, it's very close to what Nate's just been talking about. Is basically when you see someone's eyes, you realize how it's just the face of something intangible. You just realize how things look, how
Right.
spiritual things look are embodied in those faces,
Right.
So
Would you go so far as to say that when you have that experience of seeing someone's eyes, because we talk about those as the windows of the soul, that suddenly you're confronted with matter and spirit, because they're in a body, right? A person is in a body, and because of modernity and Darwin, thank you, Darwin, we look at a tree and we see wood, okay, or a 2x4, or a beam, or an apple, or something that we can use, right?
Sherry, now do you understand why I absolutely hate it when Peterson talks about seeing the world and the meanings of the world in terms of function? Like that's actually completely wrong.
Yeah.
That is how to be disenchanted and remain disenchanted.
Yeah. Yeah. It might be a stepping stone towards it, but yeah, because we think we know what we're looking at, right? Like there's that argument, to me anyway, for that. We think we know what we're looking at. We're looking at something that has a function, but that function depends on your need. Necessity is the mother of invention, right? So,
Right.
You're going to look at something and say, you're like, I think Pajot uses the chair as a thing to sit on, right? I think that's basic, probably how we feel, or stump, something to sit on.
There's not much hospitality or gratitude in looking at things in terms of what are you for.
Right. So
Right.
here's something I want to read you when you were talking before. And I think that it hits this right on the head. This is Douglas
Go for it.
Harding. He says, the further apart we draw, the higher our mutual status tends to become. On the other hand, we get progressively out of touch. What you are at this moment, in and to yourself, becomes more and more irrelevant and beyond my reach. We live in different worlds. No signals can pass between us as contemporaries. What your past is doing to me now, and the future I am preparing for you as a consequence, are as much of you as I can find room for. And your present condition over there is at most a futile specter haunting my absolute elsewhere. My relations with you take the form of incoming knowledge about you and outgoing will to modify you. There is no love lost between us, or rather, it is all lost. We know only how to use each other. The present living person, the adorable, terrible, utterly mysterious presence of him, becomes the lifeless instrument to be exploited or broken. The center has dropped out of him, leaving only a shell.
Right. Yeah, that's modernity. Like
Exactly.
that is the world that we have,
Yeah.
and it's funny because like we one of the reasons we created it was because we moved in a direction to try to banish any hint of the pagan. That's why we see the pagan reemerging on the fringes, right? Because that's we went too far in our banishing of that, in hollowing out. Because when you have one of the things that comes when you have a genuine sense of the real is you cannot help but see the world as full of gods.
Well, Nate,
And yeah,
just let me say this quick. The Gosforth cross that I showed you is to me the same. It's a Celtic version of the Greek Orthodox inclination to include Plato and Homer and all the rest of them in the narthex. It's the same move. Okay. All of the poets, all of the Greek philosophers are included in the narthex in the church,
right.
just as all of the gods are included in
Absolutely. And everything, and also the more perfectly we are centered on this is the irony. It's not irony. It's actually it's here's the miracle. The more perfectly centered we are on the logos, the more in Christ we are as a church, as a people, then the more ends up being included.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh, you don't know how many things are included in my worldview.
Well, that's what, because this has always been my pushback on Pajot's talk about center and fringe. Because if the logos is truly your center, if you have perfectly centered the logos, there is no fringe, because everything has been included, and it's part of the circle.
Okay, yes, but you have to be careful with that language too, because I mean, even the scripture talks about fringe, right? Like this is literally the tassels on the Jewish prayer shawl. Like
yes, but Judaism is a culture,
right, and we're all part of a culture,
right? And a cult, right? Absolutely. But a culture is, a culture is limited in comparison to what the church, in its full eschatological capacity, is.
right? But here's the thing: if you don't exclude the gods, right? If the gods are on the Gosforth cross, what? Like how is, like, this is the question people are probably going, what does this mean? Does this mean Christianity conquered them because it's at the top? Does this mean they're included in Christianity? Like, we always want to do this linear hierarchical thing, but what is it? There's a distinction there on the cross. They're not baptized gods. They're the gods, right? So what are they saying? I think they're saying distinction without division. I think
well, but they're also because they're on the cross, right? So that means that they're now that means by putting them on the cross, I think it's kind of inevitable to conclude that what you're saying is that they also share in Christ's death.
Of course, but that doesn't mean they're dead.
No, it's right. Right.
Yes, we have to be careful of.
Right. So Okay, so
Yeah,
Eugene, you got that?
I was gonna say what's interesting to me is that we can't really do justice to anything if we view it literally.
Yes, we
Like
can.
whether it's a tree, whether it's the sun, whether it's anything, when we view it literally, like it's a 2x4 or
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
ball of gas, the sun is the
yeah.
ball of gas or something, I don't really do justice to it. In this, and we can feel it the most acutely, even with people, because if I, for
Mm,
some reason, decide that I'm going to view you two through the lens of materialism and kind of reduce you to the material, bodies and chemicals, and be logically consistent, just follow this to its logical end, then I will simply refuse to be enchanted by you.
right.
There's basically, you will stop being those portals of divine grace, which the
Mm,
scripture clearly says that you are.
right.
That we all really are in Christ in you, the hope of glory. God is speaking and manifesting through you right now, this very minute. You know, and but if I view you separately, literally, you know, that's why Barfield really was so adamant about literalism as the problem. You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
then I will not do justice. I will not, I will not see you as you are. And I was just, as you were talking, I was looking up this word, probably I was already mentioning it. The Russian word for the communion of the saints is lik,
Oh, yeah.
that kind of word that's
I
really
love
kind of embodies a lot. So I looked it up, its etymology, and I believe it comes from the Greek prosopon, which also means face,
it. Mm-hmm.
prosopon, right? So lik uh, in Russian means face, as the outer face. Also, lik means the actual face, like who you really are. It's also
right,
lik or litso. And also it means the communion of the saints, lik svitich, like the community of the saints.
Mm.
right,
So it's all about face.
Yeah.
It's about
yeah.
face,
Because
basically.
and why face?
Uh-huh.
Why face? Because when you become focused on the face, then the question you begin to ask is not what are you for, but who are you?
Right.
Who are you? Yes. What is your name?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Because you can tell me I'm Nate, but then as I
Mhm.
listen to you, I might feel there's something else there, the true name that's being revealed.
Yeah,
Right,
You
and
maybe.
know.
this is why traditional cultures give names that like actually say something about the character and nature of the person as opposed to or the circumstances of their birth or something like that.
Hmm.
As opposed to well, I mean, our names kind of like if you look at the etymology of our names actually have real meaning too, but we just don't know what they are anymore because we're moderns. We forgot that names actually mean something.
Hmm.
It's interesting because a lot of European surnames are based on what are you for? They're
Yeah,
all
that's
their
true.
occupations.
Yeah,
They
that's
are.
true. Yeah.
Yes.
Their
Yeah.
occupations. Yeah.
Mine,
Uh,
mine's not. Mine is actually like a word that has a whole host of
Yeah, yeah. Hile.
meanings. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
mhm.
yeah.
Well, our last name Suter is a person who sews, like a seams
Mm.
and like
Oh,
a
really?
tailor. And in Switzerland, probably most European countries, they still have guilds, trades guilds. They have this one big festival in Zurich called the Sachsilüte, and that's when all the guilds come out in March together. The tailors and the whatever, the engravers, and all these old medieval guilds that still
Hmm.
exist
Hmm.
in Europe.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
here's the thing, though. Like talking about guilds, that makes me think of craftsmen. And there's a way that, like,
that's what they are, craftsmen. Yeah.
one of the reasons that we don't have craftsmanship, we have very little craftsmanship in the modern world is the way in which we are disconnected from the real. Because
Mhm.
like craftsmanship comes out of a sub creation that is engaged in the real
Yeah.
and adding to and enhancing the beauty of the real by adding in our own human additions
Create
to it.
creativity. Yeah.
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 Which is actually that's actually Tolkien talks about subcreation in relation to in relation to the fairy story specifically. So it actually is salient to the essay.
Yeah, let's get back to it.
Yep,
Eugene,
you
did
bet.
you want to finish a thought? Because you were talking about the etymology of face in Russian.
Yes. I think I sort of finished it, but I'm not sure. I'm trying to see if it has any relation to the Greek proposon, which means face. But I'll let you know.
Okay.
I'm not done. I'm not done. Good.
You know, the other thing about the guilds,
I see your interest in Barfield has created good habits.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
as a translator, though, you know, words are his.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, Nate, regarding the guilds and surnames, when you were in a guild, you ended up as a family practicing the craft.
Right.
So the craft became a family thing. Like it was a family of people who practiced, you know, the suitor was, and if you were a suitor, you were part of that guild, you know, and you were probably practicing that trade. If you were a stonemason, if you were a lumberjack, if you know, if you were a carpenter, that got handed down from fathers to sons, right? So you have to remember too that the guild was not just a trade, it was a tribe.
Mm-hmm.
It was within a tribe.
Right. Right.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Do you want to read the next part, Shari?
Sure. Where did we leave off? Next after Traveler's Tales? Is that where we are?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Next, after Traveler's Tales, I would also exclude or rule out of order any story that uses the machinery of dream, the dreaming of actual human sleep, to explain the apparent occurrence of its marvels. At the least, even if the reported dream was in other respects in itself a fairy story, I would condemn the whole as gravely defective, like a good picture in a disfiguring frame. It is true that dream, capital D, is not unconnected with fairy, capital F, which is the realm. In dreams, strange powers of the mind may be unlocked. In some of them, a man may, for a space, wield the power of fairy. That power which, even as it conceives the story, causes it to take living form and color before the eyes. A real dream may indeed sometimes be a fairy story of almost elvish ease and skill while it is being dreamed. But if a waking writer tells you that his tale is only a thing imagined in his sleep, he cheats deliberately the primal desire at the heart of fairy. The realization, independent of the conceiving mind, of imagined wonder. It is often reported of fairies, truly or lyingly, I do not know, that they are workers of illusion, that they are cheaters of men by quote unquote fantasy, but that is quite another matter. That is their affair. Such trickeries happen, at any rate, inside tales in which the fairies are not themselves illusions. Behind the fantasy, real wills and powers exist, independent of the minds and purposes of men. It is
Wow.
at any rate, huh? You
So
want to stop?
you don't want to pause on that for a moment?
Sure, yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
So because that's quite a
Oh yeah.
that's quite a claim. So do you think he's wanting to limit that to what's true inside of a fairy story? Or do you think he wants to extend that beyond the fairy story? That's my question about that line.
Which one? Read the line, just so I know.
Such trickeries happen at any rate inside tales. So it's like at any rate inside tales. So he does give a disclaimer in which the fairies are not themselves illusion. Behind the fantasy, real wills and powers exist, independent of the minds and purposes of men. I think Tolkien thinks that's true outside of the fairy story and in the real world. And this is like one of the
Well,
things that
I let me just say this. I
go
think that
for it.
for Tolkien, the quote unquote real world is fairy.
Right.
So, like, I talked to Eugene about this. That's kind of how we ended our last conversation. I asked him, "Do you think that this is where Tolkien lived?" Because then I read a portion of George MacDonald's essay in which he talks about the laws of the story that you create. So you're writing a story, and there are laws within the story, and if you break those laws, you fall out of the story. I saw an analogy there to Eden, right?
Mhm.
They broke the law, they fell out of the story. But it's also true for writing, you know, a, Lord of the Rings, for example.
Mhm.
And Tolkien created such an incredibly complex world with language and
Yes.
geography and all different kinds of peoples and different animals and all, fairies and elves and all the rest, right? So,
So
like,
I would say,
wait,
go
let
ahead.
me just say, I
Okay.
said to Eugene, how did he stay in the story? Because I would keep forgetting my laws. Okay. Like, if I was just doing it literally, and
Okay.
I'd be like, oh my God, wait, how would an elf decide what to do in this situation? How would he think? What would be his priority? And but because of all the complexity, I think that Tolkien lived there. He didn't have to think about the laws. He
Mhm.
lived in fairy.
Well, the thing is, I think when he wrote about orcs, it was the result of seeing orcs,
Yes,
seeing the
that's
faces,
what you were saying
because
before. Mhm.
see, because
Well, this is what Bartlett
we
says about all artists, right? He's like that
Mhm.
any artist in whatever they depict, they have to somehow see and experience
Exactly.
the world that they depict in the
Right.
art.
Exactly, yeah. In fact, they have to be under the enchantment.
Mm.
They have to see what's going on, really see, the
Right.
internally see. Okay, it's like I can imagine Tolkien sitting in the trenches, World War II, and really seeing the Lord of the Rings from the first page to the last page. Even though he said he didn't know beforehand what would happen, but it's just a paradox. But he would really see in the faces. He would see elves for sure. You know,
Yeah.
he would see orcs. He'd see the eye, the lidless eye for sure, that
Mm.
craves control. He would see all that.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Um,
That's why I
I,
think
I
he lived in it. That's why I
well,
think he lived
I
in it.
think as like, well, I want to come about this from a different angle because I actually want to talk about like, well, when we create these like secondary worlds and fairy stories, like, and we talk about enchantment. Well, what's really going on?
Mhm.
What's really going on, I think, is we're working out the way, like, with, because okay, so there's a way in which the modern is not modern at all, right?
No,
The modern is simply
it's a facade.
the the it's the fall at its at its lowest point, right? It's the mentality of the fall.
Mhm.
That's what the modern is, and it's always been a part of our consciousness, because none of us were born in Eden, but yet we still retain this memory of Eden, right? And a longing to return, because of the curious kinds of beings that we are. And I think that Tolkien, as like a faithful Catholic with a devotion to the mother, himself was living in both worlds at various points, right? Like he was able to write convincing secondary worlds and to portray enchantment because at times in his life, because of his relationship to the mother, shall we say, he was able to experience that world, and he was able to share that experience with us through his fiction and to bring us along with him there. And he also was able to see the imprint of that on our world. This is the important part. This is like this is something Esther Meek and I talked about in our conversation. And like she has been reading a lot of Tolkien lately. And she was like, one of the things that she didn't like about Tolkien so much is like the focus was on the enchantment too much. And what I pointed out to her was how in Tolkien's writing, he actually always brings those things back to the enchantment that is right there before us in the world that we just ignore.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that we ignore that. We ignore that because, well, it's because of the fall. Or if you want to call it modernity, I want to stop calling it modernity. I really do, because it really isn't. It's more than that. It's deeper than that.
It's a human condition.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's like and also when you start thinking about it that way, you can see the way that it's like Esther Meek's book was she called it a metaphysics of childhood, right? So you can see the way in which when we are in the innocence of childhood, it is easier for us to relate to the real, which is where one of the areas in which I would push back a little bit on Tolkien in this essay, because I don't think he quite appreciates the way in which children do more naturally interact with the real than adults do.
He gives children a pretty high position. Like he talked in the previous episode, what we read there was, I can't remember what it was, that he detested, some kind of fairy story that he didn't like. Oh, I know. It was like the butterfly sprite flower fairy.
Oh yeah.
You know,
diminutive. Yeah.
And he said, and his children detested it too.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay, so like, and he points to that quite a bit. Like he said something about that in the part that we read before.
Well, all I'm saying is I don't know if Tolkien had this insight that, like, I also think that there is a way. Although he does quote Chesterton. He does actually, because he has that quote from Chesterton where he talks about how children are innocent and crave justice, whereas we are guilty and crave mercy.
Mm.
Something to that effect. So
I have a Tolkien quote that I grabbed because of my sheep, because I have Gotland sheep. And famously, Tolkien said this of Gotland sheep.
Okay.
This is his description. Now, this is Tolkien on a walk coming across a flock of sheep. This is not him writing a story about Gotland sheep. It's just him commenting on the sheep, okay? Gray with the hue of twilight, under the trees they seemed to be, and yet if they were moved or set in another light, dusk silver as water under the stars.
See, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about, where it's like, that's precisely, yes, thank you, Shari. That's it. That's what Tolkien actually is hoping to help you see. So he's creating this beautiful secondary world that's full of enchantment, but some of the best parts of Tolkien are just descriptions like that of the enchanted beauty that exists all around us.
The reason he wrote that was because that was why he decided that all the elven cloaks would be made with Gotland wool.
Okay.
Oh, yes, that's true. Yeah.
Right.
And those are my sheep. I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about Tolkien saying this until way after I got my sheep. So that was kind of nice for me.
And then just in terms of like about how much he believed in how much he experienced his secondary worlds that he created.
That's why I keep wondering. He had to have lived there, like to see a flock of sheep like that, and to see how they become invisible as they move in the moonlight.
Yeah.
And then to go, oh, this is going to be the fiber I use. Right. It wasn't a made up fiber. It was an actual fiber that existed and did that thing, you know? So, yeah.
Yes.
So what type of clothes do you make out of these, out of the fleece? What type of clothes?
Well, I spin wool with it, and I can show you the silver. I think I have one. Well, this is not a great. This is some stuff that I carded. Can you see that silver?
Yes.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
Okay.
this is not gray, okay? This is literally like it shines like silver.
Yeah.
I have a friend, a woman in town who weaves blankets, and she does them for a fairly large organization and sells them. And she's just now primarily buying my fiber because it has a sheen, and that's what Tolkien saw. He saw the sheen and how it changes,
Yeah.
and would make the elves invisible, right? Or the hobbits
Hobbits,
invisible
yeah,
if they
yeah.
wore them.
I'm gonna share this one. Just the other day, we had so much rain, like a couple of days of rain, and I was walking on this deck, covered one, and just watching the rain. And then, for some reason, believe it or not, I thought of Goldberry, Tom Bombadil's wife,
Mhm.
Oh,
and
okay.
it just popped up, and I could really tell why Tolkien made her the wife of Tom Bombadil.
Okay, I got to hear
Because
this.
Yeah, because it seems like I could see everything was so uh, washed and cleaned
Mm,
by the rain, like day in and day out, rain, rain, rain. Everything was so verdant, so
mm,
totally green. It was like it was a way to hear the music of Iluvatar even more. So
wow.
Goldberry is portrayed as this cleaning lady. She's the daughter of the river, and she goes, if you remember, she goes on the cleaning rounds. She, it was when hobbits stayed there for actually for a week or two, but it was raining and raining and raining, and Tom Bombadil kind of warned him, "Don't go out because it's too wet for you." So I immediately thought of this verse: "The only the pure in heart will see
Right.
God."
Mm,
You have
mhm.
to have this washing to
Washing.
be able to hear. If Tom represents this, or personifies this music of Iluvatar, the original song, then to hear the song, you need the cleansing, and it
Right.
has to be repeated cleansing, and that's why they're doing this dance together.
Which is
And
why you need to be like a child to enter into the kingdom of God, because we can only see the enchanted world, which is actually the real,
mhm,
when we are in a state of innocence. Like if we're not in a state of innocence, we're going to see the disenchanted world. Like
yeah,
that's why I wanted to recast it rather than talking about in terms of the modern versus philosophical realism. I really think it's like that's a kind of a bad way to talk about it. I think really it's better to talk about it in terms of the fall,
mhm,
um, and
Shall we,
innocence.
shall we read a
Oh,
little bit more?
what one thing I wanted to say about the music. I'm glad you brought that up because we were talking about enchantment, and Eugene, you probably know this, but the Proto-Indo-European root of enchantment literally means to sing and to being,
Mm-hmm.
which is
chant.
something that Tolkien was clearly connected to, at least
Yeah,
intuitively, um, if he wasn't doing it consciously,
yeah.
and given his cosmology in his fiction.
And one of the things that the fall doesn't allow us to see is that everything is chanting.
Yeah,
Like the trees are
Mm-hmm.
chanting, the
right.
sheep are chanting. We are talking now. We actually, human beings can do either of the two. And we can either chant or not chant. We have the choice. Like everything in nature
Right,
chants,
right.
all the time.
Declares forth the
So
glory. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it. There's the nature of liturgy is always ongoing. It's just waiting for us to join it. It's actually waiting for us to come and lead it.
oh yeah.
Well, there's also a call and response, right, with chanting. So,
Yeah. Well, that's the creation.
mhm.
Is a call and response.
Yeah, yeah. So, do we want to keep it to an hour again, Eugene, or do you have any more time?
Yeah. No, that's good. That's a good place. Yeah.
Okay.
To
Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
that's fine.
All right.
We're gonna go. It's gonna take us forever to finish this essay at this rate, but I think it's worth it because it's just like so much.
Oh, yeah.
I'm
It's
enjoying
So
it
much
totally.
here. It really makes
Yeah.
my mind go. And this was actually what the experience of reading this was like. like for anyone who finds this conversation like, how did you get here? Like this, no, this is actually when I'm reading Tolkien's essay, I'm doing this in my own head.
Mhm.
It's nice to have people to talk through it with, because there's so much going on here
Yeah.
that he kind of just glosses over that really is like goes very deep.
There's a lot that he doesn't dare to expound on too. I don't know if he caught that in the very beginning, but he's just like,
Yes.
I'm not gonna, he said, what did he say here? The first
Well,
part?
he wrote this in a lecture, right? Well, he has to, because if he would, so those things where he stops himself, if he were to go into that, he could fill an entire book
Oh
on
yeah,
some of those
almost
subjects.
like he said, maybe an analysis might be interesting. He's very by the by on
Yeah.
some of that
Yeah.
stuff. He doesn't want to get too, dissecty,
But
right?
he's planting really nice seeds, though, for his
Totally.
listeners.
Yeah.
He's giving them lots of places, which is, I think, like, so I think he's inviting this, right? As the way he wrote this, it's like he's inviting people to go on these side trails, and he's putting the seeds down.
Yeah.
For all these rabbit trails that we're chasing, like he planted the seed there.
I almost have a feeling that he is talking wherever he is, delivering this lecture, that he's talking to, left brain people,
Yes,
the propositional lovers of propositions, and so, and then he also like almost like translates his visions into the propositional language to be able to relate. Because if he started with, okay, the other day I was, caught by the rain, and I could really feel that, I could see the face of Goldberg, nobody would really follow that, unless they had a similar experience, or unless they were under the similar enchantment themselves.
Right.
But to be able to bring someone who thinks propositionally to the point of where they say, okay, there's more to it than meets the eye.
Right.
What is it? Then that really is quite an achievement,
And I think we owe. I think for people who are more intuitive thinkers, I think they owe it to their less intuitive, more propositionally inclined brothers and sisters to attempt to make that to at least attempt to make that translation. Because we want to include everybody. we want everybody to be included in the more beautiful story, and we want to bring you along with us.
Well, I'm going to do a little plug for Tuesdays, because Jeremy read the Helliand throughout Great Lent. And so last week, when we had our episode of Lives of the Saints, we decided that that's what we're going to do. We're going to read the Helliand, which is the Anglo or the Saxon Gospel.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a bardic tale of the Gospels. And one of the things Jeremy mentioned last week was how just using different language and turns of phrases just illuminated the stories for him in the Gospels, like of the Gospel, right? So part of the enchantment process or project here is this and this. So I'm super excited about new words for old stories.
All right. All right.
So,
well, thank you for inviting us along on this journey with you, Shari. It's been
I'm
fun.
Privileged to have you both. So I'm really, really, really grateful. Yeah. Great. All right. Thank you so much. And
thank you guys. So good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.